Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the almost daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zabu. Let's talk Trump.
Page 102 from Karen Armstrong's A History of God. The chapter is titled A Light to the Gentiles. Yet we are constantly seeking to unite the multiplicity of phenomena and reduce them to some ordered whole. When we glance on a person, we do not see a leg, an arm, another arm, a head, but automatically organize these elements into an integrated human being. I'd like to interject here. We do that, and then we instantly turn around and then objectify that human being, cartoonify that human being, minimize that human being, right? Because of all of our biases and our negative stereotype thinking. But I digress. I want to just acknowledge that, yin yang. Karen Armstrong continues, this drive for unity is fundamental to the way our minds work and must, Platonius believed, also reflect the essence of things in general. Now here's the bit I want to get to this morning as we kick off a brand new era in the glorious days of Trumptopia here. And this is a crossover episode, right? This is like I'm doing my bibliomancy. I literally just picked up the book and opened to the page before I set up for the show, and I didn't really read all the bits. I just found a highlighty section that I had highlighted as a young person when I first read this book. And I know to some people listening, irrespective of faith or creed, you might be screaming silently in your mind, you did what? You highlighted a book? Sacrilege. And then some people don't give a fuck, right? Some people tear pages out of books to roll joints. I am not that kind of person. Although, if to really be fair, I will admit, and this is sacrilege and or may have been against the law technically, that once, as an adult, on a business trip, and this is many years ago, but I was over the age of 21, right? In a hotel, in a state where I did not know the situation around cannabis, with other people who were super comfortable with cannabis, who I did not know, I was invited to smoke some weed, and we were smoking weed. Ooh, now I'm crossing over into cannabis talk. This is all the shows meshed together into one show. Isn't it always? I guess so. Anyways, I'm in the situation, and I'm a person at that point in my life who erroneously thought that I was impervious to the effects of cannabis because I had, puff passed on someone else's thing in school and in college, not in high school. And for the record, I discouraged the use by people too young the way we discourage the use of alcohol. Let's just be sensible about it, right? And follow the science, which is a whole episode of Cannabis Talk. Put a pin in that. There's some cool sciencey things I've come across that I really want to go off on. Then part of it is just like, hooray, science! Like halfway decent good science about cannabis. And by that I mean that it's honestly trying not to prove it evil, and it's just trying to measure what it actually does in a sort of let's not prejudge it kind of way. So hooray for that. And stay tuned for that. We're going to do a whole episode about that. Maybe, just maybe, later today, depending on how strong I feel and how well my voice holds out. I digress. What was I admitting to? What horrible thing was I acknowledging? Oh, on a business trip with other people, I had not brought anything with me. I did not. I never, actually. I do not believe in just like casually carrying weed around. And I don't judge people who do. It takes all kinds, and there's people who like, fuck the world, I'm gonna smoke weed in public. And I don't know if that's something that can be protected under like the constitutional stereotypical things that we use to defend. Like, can the guy that is legally allowed to burn the American flag? I know that's offensive to people. I think that the sky flag is worthy of honoring and respecting. The sky flag, the sky paper, the sky cloth, the magic sky cloth full of freedoms and controversy. I think it's silly. I'm a person who can hold the duality of nations are imaginary. You guys are arguing about things we made up. That's about as silly as arguing about God. Because we made it up. We can change it. It's like a thing we made up. We can make it up a different way. We don't have to kill each other over them. We can just invent a better way, right? Like, why doesn't anybody think of that? I mean, we talk about fighting in the system to change the laws, but why is it a fight? It's all a horse and pony show we invented. It's all a puppet show. Even if we assume the most corrupt version of the theory, of the political theories of what's going on, or we assume the most innocent. Bottom line, it's still a thing that we, and I don't mean to borrow this language, this is synchronicity, we the people made up. Whether you believe in that particular language or that particular document, or you don't, or you believe in another document that's better, or whatever, we the human species invented the little torture show we call politics and all of its corruptions. So if we really want to change it, we can just stop fighting about it and go, oh, right, let's just build consensus on a completely new way of making that up. But I digress. Hang on a second. Where were we? I'm just excited to be alive in this world and not a flattened pancake in a disaster movie of an earthquake California disaster movie. But that's a whole nother episode. That's going to be later this morning on the actual main segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. We're going to take an honest look at just like earthquakes and Mother Nature and the gratitude we really should all be expressing in a sort of soulful, spiritual way that earthquake happened exactly the way it did. I hope I haven't already rambled at you about that in a live recording, because if I have, I apologize, because I'm going to do it again later. And if I haven't, then it all makes sense. Okay, so, right. Gratitude there. Thank you, Mother Nature. And, put a pin in it, folks. There might be a third one. I'm not trying to peddle fear. I'm speaking, I'm just actually literally just sharing what the amazing and super fantabulous, and everyone should follow her on social media and make her a celebrity, because smart people should be celebrities, not vapid, crazy, corrupt people, in my humble opinion. And she's a brainiac genius about how Mother Nature moves, how her body is constantly changing. So, according to her, there was, as of yesterday's 7.1 earthquake, like within that window of like the first hour after that earthquake, statistically speaking, it was like a 50-50 chance that we would have another earthquake as big as or a little bit greater than a 5.0, right? Another earthquake or another aftershock, whatever you want to call it. Everyone getting hung up. The news is definitely getting hung up on, what do we call this? Because everyone wants to be super accurate and correct in this era of like, we know the news is super not accurate and not super correct. Although it may not be absolute totalitarian, state dictated. Trump kind of wants it to be though, right? So like, isn't that ironic? How much he hates the fake news and yet wants to have his own fake news. But that's just Trump. We'll get to him in a second. Put a pin in that. So many exciting things to talk about. But let's get back to this crazy personal anecdote I was sharing. So in that story that I started telling about being on a business trip with a bunch of other people, some of which were from around them parts, and I think the local had some weed, and I don't want to, I don't know, and I don't understand what the situation may have been at the time. And this is like several years ago. But what I was going to cop to is I love books, right? This is all about books, not weed. But it's hilarious because to bring it back to unauthorized and explicit readings, we wanted to smoke weed. These gentlemen had provided. I think one of them had an apple and was making an apple bong, and that's the day I learned how to make an apple bong. Which, in today's context, there's no real suffering need to make an apple bong. Although even in today's context, as weed sort of, in waves is claiming its freedom, the American way, state by state, fight by fight, ridiculous argument in Supreme Courts and in policymakers, law chambers, in state capitals, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm just a bill, an American bill. How does that song go? Anyways, as this happens, as this sweeps the nation, I think, it'll still be a fun anecdote that an apple bong saved, the 420 moment of that day, because we were almost totally not going to be able to smoke any weed. So the apple bong has a limited lifespan, especially when multiple people are burning out of it, and you're using, different lighters, different heat, and you just end up burning the apple, and then no one wants to smoke out of it anymore because it gets kind of gross. And if it's already kind of an older apple, as you know, apple's brown, especially if you're doing weird things to them like poking holes and sucking a lot of air. Pretty soon, the exposed inner flesh of the apple that was being used as a smoking device looks kind of gross. But of course it does, because it's an apple that's rotting, it's airing, it's browning out, and you're burning cannabis through it. Which, by the way, if you're open-minded and a connoisseur, will sometimes grant it a very delightful sort of apple-y flavor in your mouth that you just can't avoid that tastes really good. So it's like weed apple, deliciousness. Someday someone will make the perfect, Jolly Rancher candy duplicate of that flavor, and it'll be amazeballs. But I digress. Later on that evening, because we were stuck at this hotel over the weekend, we weren't going anywhere till really late that next evening, and these guys were determined to get as high as one could get in a limited amount of time with a limited amount of weed, and then hang out there together in the hotel and watch movies and stuff and do nothing but chill. And it was an innocent enough situation. But someone had broken a piece of, a glass pipe or something, and nobody else had thought to bring anything, and it was sort of a surprise arrangement anyway. It's not like they planned it ahead of time. And bottom line, the thing that triggered this story, I totally lost my page in the book. Powers of bibliomancy, bring me that quote back. I gave the page number. Oh, here we go. Anyways, in an attempt to we still gotta smoke some more, someone's like, well, we could always roll a joint out of a page in the Bible. I shit you not. I mean, I don't know if that's the way they said it. There it is. There's the page 102. I don't know if that's exactly the way they said it, but that's the way I would write it in a play. Well, we could always roll a blunt out of the page in the Bible, because this is a bunch of white dudes, right? Let me be clear, because there's a lot of controversial, lingering baggage about criminal law, criminal justice, the way we handled it back in the day, the way we handled it in the Obama era, as we transitioned and prepared and braced ourselves for the decriminalization / reintroduction of normalization of the sacred entheogenic plant ally we commonly call weed. Spirit consciousness assistance from divine plane, and we're calling it a mangy, evil, disgusting thing. It's the exact opposite of all the toxic, frivolous things we consume for entertainment and for self-destruction purposes. It literally heals both energy and it heals you on the trifecta of your own personal trilogy, right? Your own personal. Everyone is three things. We were just talking about the perception paradigm problem and how you solve it, or at least my humble opinion. There's this question of where is the perceiver? Well, obviously, it's in all three of the major components of what we understand to be the entirety of the whole process of perception. And thus, the human body, what is it? Like, the human being, where is it? Is it the body? It can't be the body in and of itself because there's these other things going on, right? Is it the soul? Well, the soul is really notoriously hard to pinpoint, except it also sort of gives lots of evidence for itself. But where is it? Is it the shape of the body? Is it outside of the body? Is it from somewhere else? Does it emanate from within the body? Does it come and set in the body like an alien invader? All these questions. And the answer that makes the most sense, as Akram's razor would guide us towards, instead of, political ideology distracting us from, Akram's razor, for who doesn't know, it's a simple sort of axiom that, like, if you eliminate the impossible and the most highly improbable, well, that's not true. That's not the way it goes. Look it up for yourselves. Don't take my word for it. I utilize it, but I don't remember the exact phrasing of the sexy quote that everyone will want to know about what Akram's razor is. But type it in. But it's the thing that Sherlock Holmes used to say, I believe, I could be wrong. Maybe it wasn't Sherlock Holmes. Maybe it was that other detective guy in our literary world. But the simplest explanation has the highest probability. These are my own words, right, of my understanding. That if you eliminate the things that are impossible, like that can't possibly have happened, even though it's really likely or very probable, and this is me exploring, the mental implications of this axiom. If you eliminate those things that are truly, they could not have been, it couldn't have been Bob. He's already dead and in a coffin, right? Like, it wasn't Bob. Bob did not kill Jerry. Done. Okay? So who else could it? Once you eliminate those things, and you take a good hard look at what's left, usually, not always, as life is not an absolute block of white or black, because without contrast you can't determine anything. Without contrast you can't perceive anything, and that's a physiological, both like about our instrument and about reality truth that people just generally run around ignoring. Right? So the simplest explanation that is the most rooted in the actual facts as best you can understand them so that you can correlate fact with fact in the explanation and in reality. The simplest explanation, even if it's a little on the improbable side, will be the one that's most likely to be the truth. Even if they're arguably more likely or more believable or more logical sounding or more, quote, probable answers, if they're complicated, if they are more complicated than the simplest one, and if they are less rooted in facts than the simplest one that is rooted in facts, so you have a cipher there, basically, in that axiom, which I find, if you really understand it and apply it really well, can help you at least eliminate, like, really, really horrible ego traps, which, silver lining and kind of bonus, right? On top of helping you understand how you make decisions, it helps you avoid making bad decisions, thinking that way, as opposed to thinking some other predetermined way. And the cool thing about something like an axiom, based in math, by the way, based in the philosophy of science, that we, when you go back and measure a thing, and then you compare your data and you study all of the aggregate data, you get these things that we call sometimes commonly, and I would argue erroneously, but it's cute, so it sort of works, these laws of nature. Let's not go down that rabbit hole of what are and are not laws of nature. How and why would nature in and of itself, the way we see it, before people interject their minds onto it, why would it have laws? And what does science mean when it says it versus religion? That's a whole nother episode. But I got my bit out, right? So, like, I love books, don't get me wrong, but I am guilty of once having torn a page out of the Bible to roll a blunt. And that was one of those rare times where, like, I must have gotten high, but I either understood the phenomena of the experience of all the, things that you might experience preemptively or somehow intuitively or somehow, and I wasn't for clarity, I wasn't a big pothead growing up. And I wasn't around, well, no, that's not true. I was here are the facts of my life in a generic sense, in my youth, in that which might be called my childhood. I was surrounded by every kind of person you could imagine. I was exposed to really beautiful examples of, like, living saints. And I shit you not. People that were just profoundly good and radiated love and forgave and helped and transcended in my own presence, not in a, although sometimes bordering on a magical, scary kind of like you're emanating light, and but never like a, I never seen a Merkaba, but that don't mean they're not there. But I've seen everything that would seem otherwise kind of odd, but otherwise normal. I mean, I've seen, divine glory embodied in a person. I shit you not. Long before anyone taught me what that was supposed to mean, as a young person, free of religious indoctrination, because bless my parents' heart, we grew up in a sort of really wishy-washy sort of, well, we don't like any of the religions. They're all kind of crazy cuckoo clubs, but they do teach halfway decent morals, so you gotta pick up some halfway decent morals. So here you go. Take these classes, but take them with a grain of salt kind of people. Those are my folks. They weren't animate, blind faith, bullwhip you into drinking the Kool-Aid types, which, mind you, for better or worse, there's a lot of people out there that raise their kids that way, right? And I'm not spewing hate. I'm just saying that's a modality that people lived out. Just like what I just expressed. Neither one is better or worse. The cultural indoctrination of which humanity is guilty of betraying upon humanity is so omnipresent and so baked into the cake, as they like to say, so predating most of our normal everyday things that we're arguing about anyways. Like, it's deeper than religion, it's older than, it's baked into our language, which is a question I wanted to ask later this afternoon in a more philosophical, more whimsical segment. But we'll get to that. So, all of that having been said, in 22 minutes and 22 seconds worth of rambling, I'd like to point out that I love books, and I know some people are horrified by that story on a bunch of different levels. And some people are just horrified by the fact that I said all that to somehow rationalize the evil, grievous, unforgivable sin, the heresy of highlighting a book. This book is a book I have owned for the entirety of my adult life because I got it as a child, arguably. I mean, if you think about the way people think of people. I think I first read this book however old I was the year after it was published. So I'm not going to do the math right now. It's not the point. And I love books. I am a book reader. I'm a book enthusiast. I'm a big believer that I was having a conversation, or just sort of exchanging thoughts really briefly, as you do, on the interfaces of the web, books of social meme-ographs to each other. Someone had posted an interesting blurb about, I'm trying to pull up the correct name because it's not telegraphy, the capacity to read others' minds. Telekinography, that's a made-up thing that my brain is struggling to get past right now. Forgive me. Multiple time frames sometimes pull the wrong vocabulary books in the central server, and then I get this feedback loop of like, that's the wrong word, that's the wrong word, that's the wrong word, and I can't quite find the right word for you guys, my audience, here in this time frame, for the same little blurby thing in the universe. But you get my point. You get my drift. Love books, cherish books. I see nothing wrong, especially in books of wisdom, books of teaching, books of passing on that which other human beings have questioned, analyzed, and come to conclusions about that you're struggling with, you're questioning, you're not taking on blind faith, but you're preparing to, as I was taught, this is the relationship we have with books, especially books of truth, books of fact, books that are supposed to be one person's or a team of people's account of their intellectual assessment of this body of evidence under this umbrella of themes, etc. right? So to that end, to me, this is one of the most beautiful, most eloquent books that covers a theme that I've always been fascinated by and that I've read a bunch of other people's books about, including source material like everybody's religious texts. I cannot claim I've read every holy book that has ever been called a holy book from cover to cover, but the big three, I've done, the vast majority of each of their texts. Perhaps having, cut a few corners here on a chapter here or there, and maybe skipped a few times on the begats and the begottens that are more than 3 pages long. Okay? And there's probably secret code there. And all the begats and begottens, I bet if you crunch some numbers, especially if you start not in English. Okay. Pause. I am not an intellectual snob. I'm a blue-collar working man. My hands are rough and tumble, although they're also very soft and nimble because I'm also like a working man's massage therapist. I'm a working people's massage therapist, blue-collar mystic, right? Where am I going with that? I don't know. Books. I love them. I respect them. I also believe if you're working with them, I've always treated them as a person, as an entity unto themselves. Someone's actual mind, in terms of everything that their mind has looked into, collected, gathered, synthesized, which is one of the most important things we overlook in our public discourse. How well do we synthesize multiple points of data from multiple sources, right? Are we even being encouraged to do that? Or are we being echo chambered into not synthesizing sources from all over the perspective availability range? And we're being, sheepled into doing whatever the fuck the opposite of those fancy sentences I just said might possibly be. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Yeah, so that's why I feel okay with that. And to that end, if I hadn't have done that, no matter how well, and how thoroughly and how deeply and how many times I have read this book, because I'm a synthesizer, I am an electric keyboard shaped like a human being. No, I am, too many options. Which one do I pick? I am a clone of a human-like being from another dimension that's so cloney enough to be called a robot, but not really be a robot. Kind of like, what's her name on that TV show here that you guys have? That, oh my gosh, I'm really impressed with you guys because we don't have that in my birth dimension. Because everybody has that. There's like a root dimension where your personality comes from. And then all the other personalities are aggregates of the variants that derive from that core personality. But that's a whole nother episode. Put a pin in that shit. Why did I start saying that out loud? I'm one of those things, and I take books seriously. And if I hadn't highlighted that passage whenever I first read it, and then probably doubled down on the highlighting like the 4 years and 5 years later when I read it again, because that's the kind of thing I did with this book. This to me is one of my secular holy books. Like, I believe that if you've been following along with my show, you know what my cosmological model, which I guess qualifies as a kind of I'm clinging to an ideology, but the catch-22 fun loop is that that cosmological model as ideological construct necessitates, in its own definition of how it operates, the abdication and letting go of all human invented and or otherwise life form invented ideological models in order for it to exist the way it wants to as a cosmology, right? Because the cosmology says that which we are trying to describe with cosmology is in and of itself, in all of its multiplicity and infinite self-refracting self-reference and self-expression in the multiverses of multiverses, a living thing. In other words, the multiverse itself, himself, herself, ourselves, is a living thing. The way life, capital L-I-F-E, all the way across, all caps, life. Did I spell life wrong? No. Did I? I'm an idiot. This particular iteration of me did not pay a lot of attention to American spelling but I paid a lot of attention to American meaning of words. How you people use words is fascinating. I digress. So books. And I wouldn't have found this quote if I hadn't highlighted it multiple times. And the bit that comes right after it, which is really neat because, I checked it off. But let's get back into this book real quick. This drive for unity is fundamental to the way our minds work and must, Plotinus believed, also reflect the essence of things in general. Here's the hardcore quote, the thing that just knocks it out of the baseball park with the big sports ball stick. To find the underlying truth of reality. Boom, stop. Put a pin in that. Isn't that the age-old question? Isn't that the question that launches 1,000 ships behind that beautiful face that we always go to war for? Weird mythology reference, but behind everything, how petty, how complicated, how nefarious, how altruistic, to find the underlying truth of reality is what everyone is obsessed with and or is secretly seeking and or is openly seeking and or is absent-mindedly unaware of themselves seeking, because that is the thing that defines our existence in the broadest, most universal sense of the term, that everyone can't disagree with that. They can pretend to. They might throw a bunch of other distractionary things that they're quote-unquote more interested in. But when you strip a person down, that's an unavoidable, unescapable, attention grabber of a sentence. I think. I mean, I could be wrong. Am I crazy? To find the underlying truth of reality, the soul must refashion itself. There's a comma there, not a period, so I'm just pausing to breathe and take a breath and a sip of coffee. To find the underlying truth of reality, the soul must refashion itself. That the implications and the challenge there is huge, right? And then the really simple, obvious, and painful thing that this is something that Plotinus said. Go ahead. Take a moment and Google what year he was supposed to have lived in, right? You could, give or take. I say supposed to because our history is probably not as accurate as we like to pat ourselves on the back about it, especially those of us who cling to the really, really, really boring, really, 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 really square, really, really, really hetero white normative, obviously a little bit drunk with corruption, boring bell curve of the middle of history type assumptions. But I digress. A long time ago that this gentleman here is credited with telling us that which we, to this day, seem to be arguing about how to do best. Why are we arguing about how to be righteous? Right? Because my argument about ideology is that that's where they get you. They get you to feel, no matter which pocket of the echo chamber you get pocketed in, each pocket of the echo chamber of echo chambers of ideological political mindfuck is designed to make you feel like, aha, this thing. It's almost like I figured it out. I'm bringing the true and groovy righteousness to this concept, and everybody else is wrong. And as soon as you feel like that, well, what are you doing? Pitting yourself against everybody else, right? And very effectively distracting yourself from a really deep comprehension of the underlying truth of reality. Because trying to prove someone else that's wrong, that's doing exactly the same thing you are, has nothing to do with reality, I would humbly propose to you. And there's no way you could ever argue otherwise. The sun doesn't need to prove itself to anybody. It just shines and does whatever the fuck else the sun does that we don't understand yet. Right? Everything we can observe that we can categorically and a little frighteningly separate ourselves from and say, this is nature without us, and it totally can do whatever it does without our intervention, without our help, without our sustenance, without our legislation, without our saving it. It just goes on. It does what it does. It doesn't need, and did not need people. And that's where we do get the very frightening us versus them about nature, right? There's stuff that can kill us. There's stuff that can eat us. There's stuff that can kill us to eat us and or eat us as a way of killing us. And there's stuff that's just sort of, unfortunately, out to kill us anyways, even though it wouldn't eat us at all. And we otherify all that shit because that's danger, right? Danger is bad. It must be squashed and stopped at all costs. Our survival means destroying that. That may or may not have been the right choice. But people argue about coming down from the trees. That may or may not have been the right choice for our species. Now, other people argue that that never happened, but let's not disagree about what genes say, because that's silly. Let's not argue about what genomic evidence clearly proves, and that's that all life forms. And let me drop you some heavy thunder here, folks, if you've never heard this. Trumptopia is not a culture that propagates this sort of thought now as in its inception. And if here's why I do this show. If we, those whatever disparate spectrum of us who consider ourselves on the side of resistance and dissent and disagreement and saying no publicly, because we're allowed to the entire movement that Trump represents, that Trump is the symptomology of, never mind who he leads and who calls him their president, because that's a bigger picture, my friends. What he is a symptomology of is much bigger than the base that calls him their president. That's the big mic drop there moment in our Trumptopia discussion of public discourse. If you don't hear people saying that, share it at them. I'd prefer you credit me, but if you want to pretend you thought of it first, go for it. I'm really more interested in that idea getting spread to the point of being really commonly understood by everyone on the resistance. It'll save everybody on the resistance side a lot of bullshit time arguing with each other. I digress. The reason I pointed that out is because, as I talked about on the 4th of July, understanding all the things beyond the political echo chamber is what's going to really help us. If our real objectives as a quote-unquote collective resistance, what's the other? I love this term that we coined, I think, for the purposes of a particular war that was one of the last real wars that was, almost properly declared, but then it was very improperly carried over, right? And I could be kind of erroneous because the history changes in time frame. It's like switching channels in the middle of the same movie to different directors' take on that movie. They get some of the fundamental facts the same, but some of them have to be different because they were. What's my point? Conscientious decliner, a conscious dissenter. It's one of those. It's in that nexus of word cloud. Was it Nixon's war? And right this moment, because I am celebrating spiritual, mystical things, my memory's a little hazy in that way that it can get sometimes. But I'm trying to heal my body, because I did celebrate the American way, right? I imbibed of the toxic, sexy juice of toxicity that we all love and have a love-hate relationship with, and have like a really sort of, is this an abusive relationship that I should get out of moment I think we're all having. Anybody who loves drinking really ought to, and really ought to have that. And I don't say that as a teetotaler, right? Like, I'm not trying to be a hypocrite. I'm saying, as a person who just drank on the 4th of July and loves drinking and intends to raise a glass in toast and in spiritual practice and in religious, ways in the future, we really should have a deeper conversation as a society at all, not about alcohol and the big black and white scary question, drink it, yes or no, in a totalitarian, make everyone stop drinking it kind of way, or in a teetotaler sort of try to guilt everyone into stop drinking it kind of way, or in a legislative, we have to pick one and enforce the law kind of way, but rather we should have a big questioning conversation like the Democrats are finally trying to use this language, which shows some signs of hope, in my opinion, about the industry that shall be named that I like to call, quite bluntly, the gun profiteering industry. Sorry, the gun violence profiteering industry that we have here in North America, where it's super cool to make money off people getting shot in the face or in the back because they run away. Or just generally, people being super ridiculously obsessed and fixated on their ability and their need to shoot. Now, I don't want to take anyone's guns away. I've already done my public statementing on that. I should be pretty clear. I should be understood on all parties, on all sides. And yet, I like to laugh emoji in a circle of laughter. People on the left insist that I'm somehow defending the right. People on the right somehow think that I'm defending the left. During Obama's era, everyone thought I was pro-Obama, even though I was and I would offend everyone who legitimately was, part and parcel super pro-Obama, regardless of whatever their opinions were before he won, because a lot of shifting. A lot of tectonic plate shifting goes on every time we pick a new a new shepherd, a new president of the United States of America. Instead of, focusing on organizing real action, we spend millions and millions of dollars on this popularity contest. All the money spent. And this is one of those things where it's like, where's the outrage from either side? Oh, there's people outraged about this, don't worry. But where is it at the volume of everyone that's protesting anything should be have this at the forefront of their mind? All of the money that we spend, that from super PACs to lobbyists getting write-offs, and the money that gets funneled through lobbying as an industry at all as one big bucket of money. And the money that we literally spend as the voters, the people who believe in the system. And there's no reason not to have a good system of collectively organizing and voting on that which must get done. But the thing is, we really don't vote on that which must get done anymore, if we ever did. We vote on the people that we think have the ability to get that which we think must get done on our behalf, and then nothing gets done. And when we do get around to having the kinds of votes that really do implement stuff, it's usually decided by the most active plurality, which may or may not actually be representative of the majority. And so we get this catch-22 of easily being able to get mad at each other in our own community for using the vote to vote things in we don't like. Like, people who don't like pot are really unhappy right now. In all the places where we voted pot into some medical and or recreational state of acceptability. And at the federal level, we still have not achieved the real ultimate goal, which is getting it out of that bullshit Class A narcotic classification right up there next to some of the most deadliest man-made, essentially sort of pharmaceutical aberrations of natural substances into things that are really truly drugs, right? Which it shouldn't be in that category, because this is a flower that grows out of the ground that heals you and also makes you feel real good while it heals you. And that's what we call the scourge of weed. But I digress. I'm a little triggered on that because while I was, to bring it back to Trumptopia circumstances, in the channel that will soon become the actual Trump channel, if things don't change, warning from the future, spoiler alert, oh shit, that goes before I say the thing that people might get upset about if I fail to spoiler alert it. In Fox News becomes the Trump channel. It's sort of a big thing, sort of coalesce, a couple of different channels merge. Disney owns Trump now, right? Wait, does Disney own Trump? Put a pin in that. That's a question mark. Conspiracy / have we fact checked that episode in the future? And And yes, I am aggregating a list. Speaking of, are we going to the internet today? I don't know. I've been rambling forever. It's already been 45 minutes, and I haven't even turned to the things I queued up on the internet. And all the news stories changed on my Apple News thing. So the things I was going to ping and go, oh, isn't that weird, are now different and gone. And I don't know what I'm going to read about. Although they're kind of the same, too. They just kind of rearrange themselves a little bit. Cool, neat. I'm new to that, so I'm new to Apple culture. And I have this book in front of me, because this is one of those super awesome mashup cartoon episodes of everything I talk about all at once and how it all fits together. Right, so potheads, we need to decriminalize it. We need to deregulate it at all. It should be a tomato. Weed should be right next to like the silly herbs that we tell each other help cure shit. That doctors go, well, maybe, but I'm not going to waste time, and that we can just grow in our backyard. Why isn't weed that? Because if you know your facts, if you've done your history, and you don't blindly believe all the derivative garbage that's literally anchored in a dystopian, totally false propaganda movie called, what's it called? Everyone's all together? Reefer Madness. It's one of our favorite movies because it is a plain and obvious bullshit factory, make up your facts and tell lies to scare people kind of movie that we can laugh at and go, wow, isn't it crazy they tried to get people to believe this when we know these things are not true? And look at how crazy and absurd and to what extreme they tried to take it and pretend it was real to lie to us. Gee, I wonder why. I don't know. There's passages in the Bible that sound like they're talking about weed being a special magical cure-all thing that should be our food, and that it would heal us in a godly way if it was what we ate and drank and smoked all the time. But they tried to shit the fuck out that stuff in the Bible real hard, real quick, really early. But Christians don't remember that because no one reads the history of all the ways they've changed the Bible, because the Bible doesn't encourage you to do that, does it? Neither do any of the power public speakers in the pulpits that read the Bible at you and tell you what to think. But I digress. That's a whole nother episode. To find the underlying truth of reality, the soul must refashion itself, undergo a period of purification, and in parentheses, because this word is what they used in Plutonius's times, and that's how you include it in a sentence without making the sentence super long or making it one of my half-hour rambles. The word is catharsis with a K. Katharsis. To find the underlying truth of reality, the soul must refashion itself, undergo a period of purification or catharsis, and engage in contemplation. And again in parentheses, meaning this word means this phrase, theoria. Theoria, comma, as Plato well advised, or had advised. So Platonius, who's an old ancient motherfucker telling us some deep, heavy shit, long before the even silly idea of Christianity versus Judaism versus Islamism ever was invented and made up. Long before any of those chosen people spoke to us. And we're talking a long ass time ago. And if our history is a little fucked up, as I might suspect it to be, the person that we call Platonius, that might have actually originally happened even longer ago. Because the human species tends to repeat itself a lot in a sort of weird, spirally, fractally kind of way. Put a pin in that. There's like genetic evidence. To find the underlying truth of reality, the soul must refashion itself, undergo a period of purification known as catharsis, and engage in contemplation known as theoria, as Plato advised. That is a profound sentence that one can go mad contemplating and investigating and trying to figure out a way to implement in real life. But let's go on, see what else 50-year-old Karen Armstrong has to say about that sort of thing. It will have to look beyond the cosmos, beyond the sensible world, and even beyond the limitations of the intellect to see into the heart of reality. This will not be an ascent to a reality to see outside ourselves, rather. This will not be an ascent into a reality outside ourselves, however, but a descent into the deepest recesses of the mind. It is, so to speak, a climb inward. The ultimate reality was a primal unity, which Platonius called the One. So catchy. So totally overused. So cliche. But he was probably the first person to use it that way. Perhaps. I don't know. Maybe not. Like I just argued. Each of these instances of a human being recorded in history having done something this transcendently mindfucky and liberating and powerful, and yet mightily oppressed by the system around us that perpetuates our illusion of freedom in this free-range sort of slavery prison lifestyle that we are accustomed to because it's convenient. They fight against this stuff, right? Like they try to marginalize this stuff. There's a reason why this is a bestseller, but yet 99.9% of people out there don't really know what any of this is. Right? This book is a bestseller because lots of people want to know and want to read this information, but it's but the market is measuring bestsellerness, of a spectrum, of a bandwidth, of a total population, which is much larger, that doesn't even engage with that market. Right? How many people don't even read books, man? It's cool. Books are cool. I just don't read them. It's fine. And I'm not judging that. I'm not mocking that. I mean, I'm making fun of the fact that that's a stereotype, right? And that people really think that. It's a stereotype and people really think that. That's what I'm poking fun at. I'm not trying to insult the people who actually think that. I would try to encourage them to maybe expand their horizons some other way, like listening to my podcast while I read books to you. Because then, technically you didn't read a book. You just listened to me ramble about how I feel and think and am inspired by this book that I have already read 1,000 times, that you don't have to read ever again. Because also, if another sort of esoteric spiritual mind network theory is true, and this is the bit I was saying earlier, I had a conversation with my friend about not telekinesis, not telegraphy, but mind reading, right? Like if mind reading becomes, if the shared awareness magic tool set, which is what some extra nerdy time frame calls it, the shared awareness consciousness tool set or something like that. And this is time frame that I visit every once in a while that's like super extra deluxe nerdy about how they label things. So they label things in a really cute, adorable, way too many words, so they have acronyms like crazy, yo. But that's a sidebar thing. I digress. Coming back to reality here, this could have said who knows how long ago, but it is arguably in the normative history, long before any of the things we're fighting about right now really existed, right? And here is the profoundiness of it. All things owe their existence to this potent reality, because the One is simplicity itself. There was nothing to say about it. It had no qualities distinct from its essence that would make ordinary description possible. It just was. Consequently, the One is nameless. If we are to think positively of the One, Platonius explained, there would be more truth in silence. In other words, if we were to try to describe the One in terms and labels through affirming concrete statements of what it absolutely is, there would be more understanding in the silence of not speaking. That's me interpreting what Platonius said. I'll read to you what Platonius said again in case you didn't catch it. Quote, and this is Karen Armstrong quoting Platonius. If we are to think positively of the one, quote, comma, Platonius explained, or rather, comma, quote, Platonius explained, comma, quotation mark, there would be more truth in silence, period, quotation mark, ending the quote. 46. Number 46 is a footnote page reference, and that's a beautiful thing. I love footnote page references, but I want to skip ahead to page 183 and read you something that somebody else says. But since God is the source of all things, we can postulate certain things about him. Because we know that goodness exists, God must be essentially or necessarily goodness. Because we know that life, power, and knowledge exist, God must be alive, powerful, and intelligent in the most essential and complete manner. Aristotle had taught that since God is pure reason, at one and the same time, the act of reasoning as well as the object and subject of thought, he could only contemplate himself and take no cognizance of lesser, contingent reality. This did not agree with the portrait of God in Revelation, who is said to know all things and to be present and active in the created order. As Aristotle had said, quote, there are some things which it is better not to see than to see. Obviously, we've been discussing and debating and arguing the nature and the way to define and the words to use and the thing to cling to and the model to give our patronage and our obedience and our mental slavery over to for millennia, for a very long time. But also for a very, very long time. As I'd like to point out, this is not new as well. This is not hippie, new age nonsense. This is fundamental, observable, measurable phenomena that people throughout the known world have deigned to report to the rest of the world as true and self-evident once you turn your awareness towards an unfiltered, unmitigated, unmanipulated, unconfabulated, unedited, what's another word I want to put in here? Unbifurcated, undistracted, jaded, uncorrupted, clear awareness, sight, seeing, sensing, perceiving, experiencing. And where are we to turn? Not some dogmatic body of words, not some ideological model of how things ought to be, but the phenomena itself as it unfolds around us, for we are fighting over that which is reality itself. And why am I talking about this in an episode of Good Morning Trumptopia? Well, friends, the alarm clock is the calling to that returning to our more divine center, which is the place that the universe would really prefer we were all addressing our attention and awareness. And Trump is the pinnacle of the poster child for the ultimate symptomology bearer, the symptomology expresser. He is patient zero of a new plague, of a new order of the human disease, of keeping ourselves riding the ego trap, joyride, roller coaster, merry-go-round, meat grinder of self-destruction over and over again. And that the spiritual calling of our times, of every time, has been not to pledge our allegiance to the right group, that will fight the right fight and kill the right people and win the right battles and take over the right positions in order to prevent this idiocy from becoming bloody, gory, self-oppressive, self-destruction all over again. Because that never works. Because that's the seduction, slippery slope, ego trap we're literally in. Learning that lesson. That politics and violence, especially espoused together without any spiritual awareness, without any true spiritual work, and I don't mean belief blindly in someone's prescription, mine or otherwise, but the true work as it is presented to us by the organic thing we call reality. Mother Nature herself will guide us to the work that needs to be done. If we let her, if we let ourselves remember how to commune with her, as opposed to be caught up arguing about hating each other over things that Donald Trump does and the context in which Donald Trump does them. Why? Because that will always be the test. That will always be one of the boundary litmus, like, if you can't figure that out, well, your species deserves to keep swirling around in the toilet bowl. Right? If you can't figure out that telling each other lies for power and greed and corruption and organized murder and organized profit and organized profiteering in the toxic way that it is exemplified here before us in how we do, the way we roll, the way the species currently does its jam, called being a human society, if we can't learn that lesson, then are we earning our ticket to survive? We once had to survive because other things would eat us. And our solution was, let's just kill all those things. And now what? I think part of the reason we're destroying ourselves because maybe that was a bad move. Maybe that wasn't the right solution. Maybe killing everything that could kill us was not the acing, Hail Mary pass, win the game, get into heaven, move on to the next level, wherever that level is, inside, not outside, deep within us, deeper within us, some other level of the universe that is inside, but is also outside because it's got to be, because it reverses on itself in every dimension until it becomes a whole other level of being in a dimension. The multiplex of being, which is really, really what it is, your experience here and now in the little monkey suit that's listening to this podcast is not an independent stream flowing by itself. It is, in and of itself, your own multi-networked cloud of probability wave format functions that are intertwined and interconnected and residing right next to each other, but seemingly intangible to one another, but driven by the same unity of consciousness. And so, as we vote in our realities, thus the probability waveform fields tries to express, why are we voting for the dumb thing when we could be voting for the super cool healing thing that leads to other fun games and puzzles and challenges of a different order that don't involve blowing each other up or voting for people like Donald Trump. Ever. Because we won't ever do that kind of shit again. In theory. I could be wrong. But in a place, in a level of the dimension where those things need not exist, therefore they don't, arguably, if they don't exist, how can they repeat themselves, right? But here, they will repeat themselves. Here, we will live through stupidity becoming primacy and then some sort of elite hyper-intelligency becoming primacy over and over and over again in some teeter-totter back and forth, merry-go-round meat grinder of the same fucking bullshit ideological square dancing of killing each other for power, right? That's all it's ever been. Look at history. The last 500 years of history, the last 3,000 years of history, the last 10,000 years of history, all the way until we bullshit ourselves about how we think we got here in the first place, which it is kind of bullshit. It's bullshit that's right on top of the truth, right? Evolution is real. You cannot deny what the genome expresses. But yet, we acknowledge the genome, but sort of we don't deny it, but ignore a lot of things that are clearly being said to us by knowing what the genome is. And that's that not only are all people 99.9% identical, all of life is pretty much the same thing. It's just shaped funny different. But life is one thing. There is one genome expressing all the multiplicity and duplicity and duality. So the things eating each other, what do we mean now in the whatever toxic waste of a leftover of nature we're leaving for our grandchildren to get sick in and die from, never mind the wars we're fighting, never mind the politics we're leaving, never mind the economies we're gonna crash. The amount of toxic waste we've already just pooped and buried and ignored, the amount of supersite funds, the amount of the places that are like Flint, Michigan or Fukushima in the abstract, in the pragmatic reality that they are a big glowing red dot of toxic bullshit, humans did this and then walked away. That alone is going to guarantee that your children's children have a really bleak and disgusting and sort of like gonna die from cancer at younger and younger ages. Like the thing we'll be arguing about on podcasts and network television shows in 45, 50 years, 60 years, 100 years will be, aren't we lucky that human beings still live till 50 or 40 or 45 before they just fall over of cancer? Or something like that, or something grosser and worse, because of just what we've done, right? Like setting aside the roads full of cars and all the engines that turn on every day and run and burn and burn and burn and burn. Just ignore that. Set that aside, pretend it's not happening. Pretend that never happened. All the nuclear waste, all the toxic waste, all the sludge farms, all the fucking leftovers from our food industry, all the leftovers that are toxic waste from our everything industry. Let's pretend we had somehow figured out a completely pollution-free mode of transportation the moment we gave up the horse and buggy, right? That instead of from horse and buggy to some toxic waste factory of a thing that moves and goes really fast and can kill us in more than one way, and believe me, I kind of love cars. But let's just call them what they really are sometimes for the sake of not always calling them sexy cars, right? Because we have cars and, 7 million or 7 billion or 700 billion? I always forget. But some really large number that starts with a 7 and ends with a billion of people die every year just because there's so much shit in our air. And I'm not trying to be depressing. I'm trying to call them up as truths, right? So if we're materialists and we deny the esoteric, the mystical, the magical, that other than materialist, we are royally self-destructively fucked already. Let's pretend climate change isn't real. Let's pretend that, we're not going to go to war and kill ourselves that way. Let's pretend that we don't have a nuclear bomb. But all the other, toxic waste we've taken for granted, that the shit we've just turned a blind eye to, the fireworks, those we still have, for some whatever reason, in this imaginary universe that I'm defining for our mental exploration of just how bad things really are here and now, because the shit we are not excluding is real and factual and measurable and all totally out there in this real world that we all cohabitate. And the reason it's the things we're not ignoring in this model of imagination is because they are the things we have generally been kept in ignorance of, are ignorant of, turn a blind eye to if we are really too much aware in order to cope. Because you can't. It's hard to cope. I have to physically turn on I am aware of what Fukushima is and how much waste is pumping out blinder in order to not go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and get really depressed. Because from the moment it happened, however many years ago, I was like, oh fuck. Well, the best thing we can hope for now is superpowers, yo, because that is some fucked up amount of toxic waste, radioactive toxic waste, that is now going to be part of our day-to-day life for the rest of forever. Because it's not going to stop magically and go away. And while Mother Nature may survive it and be grossed out and disgusted by it and have to cope with integrating it and distributing it, and you think we're going to have it bad, she's the one that it's got to literally reside in the bones of. if this planet's still here and the sun hasn't exploded a billion years from now, because let's say that final event of total eradication isn't for another 10, 20 Googleplex billion years away, just to make up a big number so we can give ourselves plenty of room to play fantastically. In a fantastical mental imaginarium theater experiment of the mind, let's say we got lots of time, right? And human beings and Mother Nature somehow survive this toxic self-destruction, this gun to the jugular of our collective lives that we already have cocked and trigger finger is pulling tension on. Because to pretend otherwise, that we're any earlier in the disaster, is to willfully ignore something that's real and out there. Just Google the word Superfund site. If you've never heard that term, you're in for an awakening of like public domain knowledge fact that you've just been delightfully shielded from, right? And I'm not being, I'm not complaining. I'm saying, folks, the situation isn't dire. The situation is brutal. The situation is entirely our fault as a species because we have willfully agreed with ego at every epoch of history that we can tell ourselves stories about with reasonable accuracy, as we were just reading, right? In the grand old Platonic era of people who studied Plato and thought he was, this guy's got some heavy shit to say about the world, and maybe the way we do everything else is lame and toxic. We knew and were told with some clarity and some authority that to end the problems, because to understand the true nature of reality would end the problems, wouldn't it? Because the problems tend to be a result of us doing stuff without a very accurate or clear or true understanding of the real and true and genuine nature of reality. It could be said, I would like to postulate, if it hasn't ever been said as such before, that I think I am expressing that as a theoretical statement that must be measured and tested and verified to see if it's true or not. And I think, based on my preliminary investigation, that likely it is. And so if we are going to be just pure materialists, we're royally fucked, yo. And I think the evidence is there. And I'm not trying to be that materialist fearmonger. Let's let it all go and blow ourselves up anyways. I'm not that defeatist. And I didn't, get sent here from some alternate timeline to warn you about your own self-destructiveness to be like, well, go ahead and blow yourselves up, right? That's crass and cruel and rude. The catch is, it's a weird, crazy thing to try to get people to wrap their brains around. All y'all are, spiritual beings from another dimension that were sent here to prevent this craziness. Or to at least bring it back from the edge of self-destruction and reintegrate all the trauma that, reintegrate, heal, cleanse, transform through the tools of what? Catharsis and theosis, spiritual healing and contemplation, so that we may realign ourselves to reality as it actually operates and not argue about it in terms made up by some politician or another whose goal is to keep us distracted and voting for them, which achieves nothing but political profiteering, war profiteering, and toxic societal profiteering. As always, my friends, I say these horrible, critical things with love, unconditional love, because, well, that's what we're asked to try and do, right? And I don't know how to do anything else because I cannot lay blame because I am, we are all one together in this craziness. There is no blame to lay, there is just the internal transformation to initiate. So let us support each other in that transformation by doing what we can to initiate it and inspire others around us to initiate it, and to know that no matter how smart and savvy and aware of this stuff we've ever been before, it is an ego trap to stop and pat yourself on the back and say, I'm woke and you're not, and I'm better than you for it. Because lots of people seem to be doing that. Lots of people think that that's a valid thing because lots of people ain't really ever understood what being woke actually means in the biggest sense of the word. And it shows. And I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm just trying to be real. We're still here. This is still the dream. As Alan Watts told us back, almost getting on. It's going to be 100 years ago that we can say 1950-something was. Although not quite yet. How many years is it now? Like 90-something? I don't know. I haven't done the math. We can do the math later. This show's not about doing the math. Although this show totally believes in doing the math. It's not about me doing it right this second because I don't have a calculator out. Alan Watts is reminding us in his public discourse, life, publicly sharing with the world that era's attempt to grapple and grasp with these same issues, these same windows of understanding into the human phenomenon and how it works and how we lie to ourselves about how it works and how we could be aligning ourselves to the truth of how it works much healthierly, in a much more holistic and healthy way that is less toxic at all, up to and including the way we deliver food to one another, the way we deliver healthcare to one another. We could be operating, we could be being America and being the world, the nations of nations that we have in a much less, let's blow ourselves up from inside kind of way. Why don't we let ourselves? Let's, shall we?
Warning. This podcast contains material that may or may not be considered appropriate for the average Trumptopian household. Listen at your own risk to unauthorized and explicit reading. Disclaimer. All rights to literature referenced are retained by appropriate entities, and no infringement is intended. The reading of any and all literary materials referenced herein is done expressly for the altruistic purpose of genuinely facilitating the species-wide, pineal gland activating, third eye opening, transcendent spiritual enlightenment of all of humanity. Any and all opinions expressed herein are exclusively those of the imaginary talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. And now, brace yourselves for unauthorized and explicit readings.
Not going to start a whole episode here. I just wanted to play that as my outro music for this episode. Thanks for tuning in, Trumptopia. We are in a precarious place, and we really need to brace ourselves because all kinds of crazy new levels of clusterfuck of insanity are coming our way, I think. I don't know. I could be wrong. But, it never hurts to brace yourself against cuckoo. At any rate, stay tuned for a little later today as I come back with other things that I sincerely have got to say. Until then, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart, my friends.
Good morning, Trumptopia. Warning.